there's so much silent suffering.
Yeah.
They have high functioning anxiety. They're very dysregulated, and they end up having all these health issues down the road. This is a huge epidemic in our world with women specifically.
To me, this comes down to identity. Good girl programming. What did you need to not be in order to feel good as a kid? For me, it was I had to be quiet. I had to not have emotions. I had to do well at school.
Mainstream mental health is flawed, and I'm pulling back the curtain. I'm Andrea Clark, a former family therapist who walked away from the system to expose the truth. After my own journey from medication maze to holistic healing, I'm here to challenge the status quo and reveal the mental health truths most people don't know. The truth about mental health is your radical roadmap to wellness. Raw stories, expert insights, breakthrough solutions. This is where traditional modalities end and real healing begins. Dr. Ashleigh Moreland is a neurophysiologist, therapist, and founder of Remind Institute. She specializes in helping people heal nervous system dysregulation, trauma patterns, and emotional wounds that traditional mental health approaches often overlook. Through her courses, coaching, and speaking, Ashleigh combines neuroscience, psychology, and heart-centered healing to support deep, sustainable change. She is passionate about shifting the conversation around mental health from symptom management to true healing and empowerment. Hi, Ash. I'm so excited to have you here today.
I'm so excited to be here. I can't wait for this conversation.
I know it's going to be epic. So for everybody listening in, this is Dr. Ashleigh Moreland, and she's in Australia and I'm in Las Vegas. So I love that this podcast connects practitioners and other people with incredible knowledge and testimonies all over the world. That's very exciting to me. And I'd love to dive into the work you do first.
Yeah.
Like, can you share just a little bit more beyond the bio I read?
Yeah.
What do you do? Why do you do it? Why are you passionate about this? How are you helping people change their lives?
Yeah, I am passionate about it because it's been my lived path. So I was a customer of the mental health system myself for over 20 years. I grew up in a really traumatic home environment with lots of mental health issues of parents and extended family and alcoholism and all this kind of stuff. And we're going to talk about this later, but the difference between big T trauma versus little t trauma, and little t trauma being relational in nature and those really foundational needs not being met around being seen and heard and understood and validated and emotionally and psychologically safe and all that kind of stuff. That was really, really absent in my whole intergenerational story. And I had the whole top drawer full of diagnostic labels. I had been on every medication imaginable. And although even after 20 years of therapy, I understood my issues, like I really got it. The dysfunction in my life was still there. And so that was my personal experience and walk with that. But it wasn't really until my son had a medical experience around 1-year-old and he completely changed behaviorally, regressed in every way. And it was like this mama bear moment. It was like I took him to specialists in 3 different states of our country and everyone just brushed it off and made out like I was some kind of psycho. And at the time I was doing a PhD in neuroplasticity. And it was like that movie Taken where it's like, if it's money you want, I don't have that. But what I do have is a very particular set of skills. And I knew that if anyone was going to help my child, it was going to be me. Yeah. And so even though my background now is relevant, it wasn't relevant at the time where I had the breakthrough, because the breakthrough really came from wanting to help my child in understanding the behavioral changes, the mood changes, every change in him. And as I was understanding his brain development, as I was understanding physiologically what was happening in his body, all these dots started to join for me in what had happened in my life.
Yeah.
And so this was like this absolutely brain exploding moment for me. And I was a neuroscientist because I always just thought if the brain controls everything, then surely if we just fix the brain or change the brain, then all our problems go away. And sadly, that's not true. Yeah. And so it was like this, again, the whole journey just unfolded in going, if the brain's not the answer, what influences the brain? And of course, there's physical and physiological things, but going even deeper than that, I had this realization one day where I just went, we call it the mental health system And I was a university lecturer for 12 years in this space. So I had lots of students studying psychology and all this sort of stuff. And I went to Google and I just wrote, define mental. And Google said, relating to the mind. And it was in that moment, I was like, hang on a second. That didn't say relating to the brain. It said relating to the mind. And it's just like this unconscious accepted thing that we use those words interchangeably, like the mind and the brain are the same thing, but they're not the same thing. And as a neuroscientist, that both devastated me that I've done 10 years of uni. I'd been in therapy for 20 years in the mental health system, and not once had anyone ever said to me what the mind actually was.
Yeah.
They had spoken about the brain. They had spoken about chemical imbalances. They had spoken about physiology and medication and all these things. But the physiology changing via medication did not change my life. It might have taken the edge off symptoms. And so that really opened me up to wanting to understand the mind, to really deep dive into a higher level than just this flesh meat suit. Because the best way I can describe this is that my brain can't go back to my 6th birthday party.
Right.
But my mind can. Yeah. So our mind is metaphysical, which means it doesn't have the qualities or characteristics of time or space. So if my mind goes back to my 6th birthday, depending on whether I had all my friends around and I felt really safe and celebrated and loved, my brain in real time in my 35-year-old body is going to respond with chemicals of safety and love and connection. My body is going to feel physical sensations in real time, but if my 6th birthday was lonely, isolated, if I was rejected, if that was my experience of my 6th birthday, my mind traveling to my 6th birthday is going to activate my threat responses. It's going to cause an influx of chemicals in real time in my 35-year-old body that relates to that experience. And that was the key for me, that I went in 20 years with therapists. No one had ever been able to explain that to me.
It's insane. And I had this thought when you were speaking about, sometimes I'd have people come into my office who had seen other therapists long term, and we'd be speaking about, their history or whatever. And I would have this thought, they've really gotten good at understanding themselves, intellectualizing their dysfunction or their patterns or whatever, their history, but they're not embodying any type of healing or change. And as a therapist, sometimes I knew how to help them embody that, but sometimes I didn't, to be really honest with you. There's limitations to the things that I was taught and learned. And being able to understand yourself is great and necessary. But if that's where you stop, that's not healing at all. I mean, I've worked with so many people who understand themselves very well, and they can't stop a pattern to save their life.
That's right. Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. This is exactly what we talk about with the Remind Institute. We have courses that are more like journeys. So we've got one, for instance, for, I call it neurobehavioral responsive parenting, essentially. And one of the things that we talk about in that is, if you have your hand in a fire, is it really a self-control issue that you can't keep it there? No. It's a literally biological thing. You have these reflexes that are inbuilt for your safety and survival to avoid discomfort. And we can understand the reflexes. We can understand our behaviors. But if we don't know how to correct them, like we've got reflexes treating, picking up a very safe pen as if it's picking up something that's on fire, and that's happening every time, well, then we can kind of logically go, well, that's a misfiring reflex. That's not right. And so if behaviorally our fight responses, our flight responses, our freeze responses, our fawn responses, they are reflexes that are kicking in for our survival. It's not a failure of us as a parent. It's not a failure of us as a person. It's our nervous system doing exactly what it was biologically designed to do, to protect us. It's just trying to protect us from things that are actually no longer threatening.
Yes, absolutely. I love this. I love it. Anxiety, mood swings, brain fog, hormonal chaos. Before you blame stress or just being a woman, have you checked your mineral levels? Minerals are the foundation of your mental health and hormones. Magnesium, zinc, copper, and iron control everything from your mood and energy to your cycle and stress response. But most women are walking around depleted, and they don't even know it. Here's the truth. Birth control, stress, and even pregnancy can drain your minerals, leaving you feeling anxious, exhausted, and out of balance. But no one's testing for it. When I got tested, I found several key minerals were significantly out of balance, even though I eat well and I take excellent care of myself. It was a wake-up call that changed everything for me and my health. You don't need to just deal with it. You need to get balanced. A simple at-home mineral test can give you real answers, so you can stop guessing and start healing at the root. Check out hormonehealingrd.com and use code MHM20 for $20 off your test today. You can also check the show notes for links and codes. Okay, so is that what you do in your institute? Are you helping people rewire brain, mind?
Yeah, exactly. So as I said, my PhD was in neuroplasticity, and that was really, really helpful because I understand how to, what I guess the environment needs to be for a brain to either say, yes, I will rewire, or no, I'm not rewiring. And I'll give you an example of this. This was an accidental finding in my PhD. Honestly, I wish it was just because I was massively smart and I was a genius. It wasn't that. If I'm being honest, I was pregnant with my first child when I was doing my first lot of data collection, and I had a deadline, this baby was coming. And so I was doing a 16-week intervention, and I did not, because of lab availability, and the testing sessions were 4 hours each per person. And I had to do it every 4 weeks across the 16 weeks. So because of lab availability, I didn't have capacity to test and train and do all these things one-on-one. I decided to do it in group sessions, purely for no other reason than if I didn't do that, I risked not having my data collected before my baby was born.
Yeah.
And I found results that completely defied all the literature. And I did this in older adults. So we had people from 60 to in their 90s participating in this because there was a belief in the literature that old people's brains were not as plastic. They couldn't change. So I was like, okay, well, let's pick the hardest people and see if we can change their brains. And what I found is that we had results that had never been seen before. And in trying to understand why that was the case, the only conclusion I could reach is that they did it as a group and they built relationships. There was community, there was connection, there was consistency. And what I learned is that in previous research in neuroplasticity kind of protocols, if someone did not respond, if their brain just didn't change, but you gave them a dose of levodopa, which is essentially dopamine, right? The people who didn't respond became responders and their brains changed. So that told me dopamine is a really, really important mechanism in changing the brain. Mm-hmm. But there's two ways that we can get dopamine. And this is where the concept of trauma is so important. Because if we grow up in an environment that is a little bit unpredictable, maybe psychologically, emotionally unsafe, walking on eggshells, maybe our emotional needs weren't met consistently, then we have to biologically, to survive, activate our stress centers. Mm-hmm. So our brain, we're literally relying on cortisol on a daily basis to keep us alive. And cortisol can be a precursor to dopamine. So one way we can get dopamine, this is why people with brain wiring consistent with things like ADHD and those kinds of things will be constantly dopamine seeking. And quite often they'll say things like they feel really alive when there's, risky behaviors. There's threatening behaviors. They'll leave things to the last minute. It's like all of a sudden their brain comes online and things like this. And this is the neuro behind that. The other way that we can get dopamine if our brain is not wired for this survival type daily basis living, the only other way is through oxytocin, which is our connection hormone. It's our safety hormone. It's our belonging hormone. And so this is what really influences brain wiring and how our reward circuits are driven into adulthood. If we grow up in a home where we feel seen, where we feel heard, where there's consistency, where our caregivers can be responsive to our needs, then we are rewarded socially and relationally through dopamine off the back of oxytocin. And so my only, conclusion from the results of my own PhD work was that the oxytocin that must have been at play modulating dopamine in these people's brains just made it an absolute hit of like neuroplasticity. It was just the perfect petri dish inside their head to be able to experience neuroplasticity. And so being able to bring this really deep, complex science into the relational aspect of then tying in mind-based modalities and somatic work and understanding how emotion is encoded in the body and all this stuff just makes what we do so unique. I don't know really anything else like it.
It's incredible. Do you offer the research that you've done? Do you have that linked on your website for people to read?
No, I haven't. And the tricky thing with this is I didn't measure people's oxytocin. So that's like my best, most educated theory around what happened. But when I look at, from a clinical perspective, when I look at this, I go, we know that, for instance, borderline personality disorder often goes hand in hand with complex PTSD and childhood trauma. So if someone has borderline personality disorder, really tricky thing is that talk therapy won't help, medication won't help. But do you know that one type of therapy that has been shown to actually make a clinical difference to people with BPD is...
Are we talking about non-somatic forms of therapy?
Yeah, predominantly.
Attachment therapy, that is what I was...
Well, group-based. So DBT and having group-based relational experiences with safe people. And when in the course, we've got courses on childhood trauma and complex PTSD. And in that, I say, if this is a relational injury, if you imagine that in your childhood, you had a relational injury to your nervous system, the only way to heal a relational injury is through healthier relation. And so sitting there with a therapist talking about your issues is not even touching the part of your brain where the injury even is. It's kind of like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone. Mm-hmm. And so being able to understand, PTSD is very different to complex PTSD because that's just a one-off event. That's your big T trauma, might be an incident or things like that. So, I'm not in academia anymore and I'm not in the system. And I think this is what I really loved about our off-air chat before we started is I can resonate with your story. And it's really interesting because in Australia, we have this regulatory body called AHPRA, which is the Health Practitioners Regulation Agency. And I will have people who will literally go to the extent of Googling me, researching me, trying to discredit me because I'm not AHPRA registered. But what they don't understand is that if I were AHPRA registered, I would not be able to do the work that I do to actually help people.
Right.
Because like you were saying, that they just don't get it. There's red tape. There's things that say that, very, very, very strict limitations. EMDR, for instance, is considered now the gold standard for PTSD because it's approved.
Yeah.
That's the only reason. EMDR is not necessarily the best modality for PTSD, but it's the only one that people are now speaking about simply because the red tape said, we'll give this one a tick. And so people will post in like communities and stuff asking for a psychologist or asking for an EMDR practitioner. But from what they've said, I have insight into what's happening in their nervous system. And I know that EMDR is not the right thing for that person, or not say the right thing, but the best thing, the optimal thing.
Right.
But then people try to discredit me because I'm not a psychologist, i.e. I'm not registered in that system. But my choice to not do that is so that I can actually help people in the way that I know is, holistic and complete and actually going to serve them.
Yes, this has been a really interesting process to start to really speak more openly on my social media platform about the things I experienced, the red tape that I've experienced, and then to launch this podcast. And for the most part, it's been very positive, but you do get people who don't understand that there's so much they're not being given access to.
Yeah.
And that there is an overarching, call it a governing body or like a ruling body, right? That decides what people are going to get access to, what they're going to be able to get funded, what their insurance will pay for.
That's right.
And there's so much more that they could be accessing if our system looked different. I actually interviewed somebody earlier today. It's really cool to be having this interview with you now after, because he's in academia and he does do some training. He does EFT and he does tons of research around meditation and how it rewires your brain. And he's just spouting off all of these statistics. And he said that it takes 17 years for a new modality, a new healing modality or healing intervention to even get to mainstream practice. And 4 to 5 of the things they discover, 4 out of 5 don't even make it at all. So we're getting like 1/5 of things that could be healing people and helping people. And it's just crazy to me. I'm like
100%.
But people don't understand that. And they think that you're telling them what they're doing is wrong or that there's only one way. And it's really it makes me sad. It really makes me sad because there's so many people being misinformed.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's
full picture.
Yeah. And it's not just our industry. Like there was I don't know if this would have reached you guys, but there was a very high profile case in Australia of a orthopedic surgeon based in Tasmania. Now, as an orthopedic surgeon, he would have a lot of clients or a lot of patients who were diabetic and was performing a lot of limb amputations in poorly managed diabetic patients.
Yeah.
He had this passion to want to help his patients and delved deep into research going, there has to be something that can help them.
Yeah.
I guess like the level of moral injury just didn't feel right about cutting off people's legs because their condition was poorly managed and the best that they could offer them was the food pyramid, basically.
Right.
Just with a heart to serve and help his patients, started recommending some dietary changes based upon the research that he had found that would support different metabolic processes in the body, essentially. And what he consistently found is that when people came to him for a consultation and he said, okay, this is the surgery, it's very invasive, we're going to literally cut off your limb, or you can try this for a period of time and see how you go. And people were trying this dietary change and not needing limb amputations anymore. He was literally saving their limbs. And, you know, a dietitian at the hospital that he worked at reported him to the board of the AHPRA for operating out of his scope of practice because he's not a dietitian, he's an orthopedic surgeon, and his job is to cut people's limbs off, not to give them dietary advice. Even though his dietary advice was saving people's limbs. That's the level of bureaucracy that exists in these systems. And the general public don't understand that. Even something that really hurts my heart is in Australia, we have this scheme called the mental health plan.
Okay.
And what the mental health plan is let's say someone's experiencing some kind of mental health challenge. They can go to their general practitioner, their doctor, and say, I'm struggling with my mental health. And this sounds amazing, right? The doctor can write this form, which gives them access to 10 subsidized mental health sessions with a psychologist. But what the general public don't know is that in order to get that form, the doctor has to write a diagnosis on it. So they'll write a diagnosis like depression, generalized anxiety disorder, insert whatever label here. That now goes on their formal medical record, which then can and is commonly used against them for things like insurance claims. So let's say I have a client who many years ago, gosh, I don't even know how many years ago now, his brother had taken his life. And to support himself through that season, he went and got a mental health plan and started seeing a psychologist. Now, fast forward many years, he was experiencing workplace stress, major workplace issues, to the point that he essentially kind of had a bit of a mental breakdown. And work cover, which is like your workplace insurance thing, would not cover him for his workplace mental health injury because he had a pre-existing medical condition because of that piece of paper. And so this is my desire, is to have faith in our government and to have faith in the systems that they're there to help us. But my experience is not that. And I don't like how cynical I can be now, where I kind of go, well, if it seems too good to be true, what's the real truth? Like, that's the story they're telling us. Oh, look, we care about you so much and we're going to give you 10 mental health sessions every year and you can only use it with a psychologist. You can't go and use it with someone who's got skills who can help you in the somatic stuff or anything else that's going to help. But I look at it and go, it saves their butt in the future, because now they've got all these people who, through the guise of helping, now have formal mental health diagnoses on their medical record, which can and is used against them in the future.
It's I don't think you're cynical. I think, how can you not feel this way, right? It's interesting because in grad school, so I was trained and I have a degree in psychology, a master's in psychology with the concentration and the specialty in marriage and family therapy. And as far as I know, in regards to master level clinicians, marriage and family therapists are really the only ones trained to look at the systemic perspective, the whole person, everything going on in their environment, the family system, right? And we had to learn how to diagnose, obviously, but something our mentor kept saying to us in grad school over and over is, this is part of something you have to do for the insurance purposes, but we don't actually believe in diagnosing.
What a blessing.
It's a systemic issue. It's not like this person just has this pathology out of just because they were born this way.
Yeah.
And that was really helpful for me, because, and another thing we learned a lot about is this concept of do no harm as much as you can. So diagnosing somebody is harmful in one way, right? It's very harmful. We could talk about all the ways that it's harmful, but let's just talk about what you're explaining, where when you diagnose somebody, that goes on their permanent freaking record.
As if it will never go away.
Yes. And also it can be requested by many different agencies, many different systems, right? The school system, or an attorney in a divorce, or, they can...
Going for jobs, applying for jobs.
Right? Also, it can affect how you are perceived. Like, let's say you go to your general practitioner for, especially women, you go to your general practitioner for issues that you're having. And if you write down that you had any previous mental health diagnosis, they automatically are going to start. Maybe not all of them, I'm overgeneralizing, but my experience is a lot of them are then going to connect what you're currently dealing with to that, instead of listening to what you're currently dealing with. You could be in perimenopause. You could be, there's so many ways. And so it's very dangerous. And one of the things that I did was I milked the shit out of the adjustment disorder diagnoses, because it's considered not permanent, right? It's considered you're going through something in your life, but you can only use it for like 6 months. You can only use it for 6 months. And it's a huge problem. And so as a person who's been in the mental health system and also practicing it, whenever I went and saw a therapist, I haven't seen traditional therapists in over a decade, but I would say I'm only seeing you in agreement that you're not going to put any kind of diagnoses that I don't agree to on my paper, like on my... Like, you need to put adjustment disorder. If you can't do that and you don't feel comfortable with that, I can't see you, because I don't feel comfortable with having the potential for that to follow me.
And it becomes like an identity, a stamp on you that is permanent. And that's what I have a lot of parents ask me, because my eldest child is diagnosed with the whole, I call it the D soup, the ASD, the ADHD, the ODD, the SPD. There's a lot of Ds. And the thing is, before I understood, like I said, it was his journey that really took me down this rabbit hole of wanting to understand. And he's almost 12 years old. Now, attends just a mainstream school. He's very emotionally aware and emotionally intelligent. He has amazing capacity to recognize his own dysregulation and request co-regulation. And he's developing the skills to self-regulate even without co-regulation, which is really age appropriate. But I have a lot of parents say to me, should we diagnose our kids? And although this is a very personal conversation, my point to them is, look, it opens doors. If you can't, so in Australia, we have this thing called the National Disability Insurance Scheme, NDIS, and that if you have certain diagnoses and you qualify for support, then that gives you funding to be able to access things like speech therapy and psych and stuff like that. So
it's the same here.
Okay, awesome. And so I say to them, if you can't get your child the support that they need because of financial barriers, I mean, it's $200 a session here.
Yeah.
To just see a speech therapist. So if you don't have the financial resources or capacity to be able to get the support that your children need, then leverage it. Do it.
Right.
But if you do have the capacity to get them the support that they need, then consider not, because you're protecting them from having that on their permanent medical record. You don't know what your child's future career path might be. But like my son now is a functioning, healthy, amazing human being. There's nothing that any of those labels that was placed on him when he was 4 years old would be relevant to in his adult career path.
Right. Or
it's
even
not
mostly relevant to him now.
No, exactly.
Right.
Apart from, if there's still auditory stimuli, he struggles to process auditory stimuli. So if there's a very, very loud environment or something, he will become dysregulated, but he will go within. In his dysregulation in those spaces, he'll go and read, because reading is a healthy dissociation from the overwhelm of the environment. So, but I know adults who can't do that because they were never taught. And so I look at it and go, I have, like I said, I've got a whole top drawer full of labels. My favorite label is ADHD, because even though it does have challenges and my nervous system is wired in a particular way, I look at it and go, sometimes a diagnosis can be the thing for people to say, well, I can't do that because I can't.
Yeah, I hear that a lot.
Yeah, I can't do that because I have ADHD. I can't do that because I'm on the ASD spectrum. But I have this thing called the Tong theory. And I just created this one day when I was chatting with a client. And my theory is, let's say that we were born and we had never had tongs in our home, but we wanted to cook a steak. Am I going to say, oh, well, I can't eat steak because I don't have tongs to flip it?
Mm-hmm.
You just wouldn't do that. What would you do instead? You'd go, I want to cook a steak. I don't have tongs to turn it over, to flip it. So how could I flip my steak given that I don't have tongs?
Yeah. What do I have?
Yeah. What do I have? I got a fork. I got a, egg flip thing. I could just use a pan flip. I could use my fingers carefully. There's so many ways I can still flip that steak. And so I talk to clients. We're really big on empowering and understanding. We talk about working with your brain. So what's the outcome that you want to achieve? How do you want to feel? How do you want to show up in relationships? What is meaningful for you? And then we don't talk about what you don't have. We then look at going, okay, so based upon the outcome that you want, how do we support you to reach that outcome, given that these are the barriers or the challenges or whatever? And then we pull across all of our weird and interesting resources, understanding the nervous system, understanding their mind, understanding their patterns of behavior and past and belief systems and all that, and going, now, how can we work with what we've got to support you to achieve that goal? I think it's so important.
It's really important. And it brings me back to remembering when I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and I sat there listening to it. It didn't make any sense to me. And I feel really blessed because I had enough anger in me and wherewithal to know that my parents were the dysfunctional. I mean, I don't think many people do, right? I feel very fortunate that that's part of my story. So I was just more mad. I was really mad. But I will say that I think that gave my mom some sort of validation, or she could make sense of my moodiness and my reactivity to my stepdad and all the stuff going on at home.
Yep.
And maybe that brought her some sort of peace for her or something. Whereas for me, it felt, I was really upset that I was diagnosed or labeled with something. I remember sitting there thinking, there's nothing fucking wrong with me. Like, do you guys don't even know how my parents are? Like, they're the ones who need the help. But I was 15. I just sat there quietly, compliantly. Like, I knew this was something I just had to deal with. And I remember, because I'm certified in DBT. So I remember going through that training, and I was working with all of these adolescent girls and seeing these patterns. And I went and sat with my mentor during one of my meetings, and I said, I want to talk to you about something personal. I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and I really just don't think that that's accurate. I've never really told that to anybody, because it's almost something that I had a lot of shame around. And I often, as I grew up and then went into being a therapist, I often question, like, do I have bipolar disorder? I know I have some dysfunction. I know I don't always have the best emotion regulation skills, but does that mean I have a mood disorder? And so I'd kind of battle myself. And she was, I'll never forget it. She's like, Andrea, and I said, I'm not on medication. I haven't been on medication since I was 19. And she's like, sometimes people are reacting and responding to their situations that they're in at the time. And it can look like something diagnosable. Or she said, but the person who is sitting in front of me, and how well adjusted you are, and how high functioning you are, and how much of an impact you make, and you make very grounded decisions, at least from my observation. She's like, I don't get that you have bipolar disorder. She's like, I think that maybe that was given to you as a label at the time based on things that were being observed. And it sounds like you were just responding to your environment.
Yeah.
And that was one of the most healing conversations I've ever had in my entire life, because I just questioned myself all the time because I had this label hanging over me, and it was constant questioning of that.
Yeah. How validating for you.
It was very validating. And I think about that a lot, because there's a lot of people who didn't have the fire that I had at that age. And then also getting to have this formal training to know, maybe I should question that. Right? People are just walking around. I have this. I have that. I'm that way because of this. I'm that way because I have this diagnosis. And I'm just like, that's bullshit. Like, and the other piece to it too, I'm like on a soapbox right now, but I really have a problem with children being diagnosed with multiple different disorders. And this leads to a discussion of how the DSM even works. It's not like there's tests for all of these diagnoses, because you can go to one clinician.
Characteristic set of symptoms. That's it.
I would have people sit down in front of me after seeing multiple different clinicians, or, people in different disciplines within the mental health system. They had like 4 different diagnoses. It's like, okay, that's not helpful at all. And that's making a parent think that their child is just totally pathological, and it's very hopeless feeling. And half of them aren't even accurate. And it's just crazy. It's all subjective for the most part.
And I think it's how it's framed a lot of the time. Like, I work a lot with childhood trauma. Like I said at the start, people think of childhood trauma and they think sexual abuse, they think violence, they think all these kinds of things. And that is trauma, don't get me wrong. But it's not the kind of childhood trauma that is rampant in our society. And I think this was really especially profound after the Industrial Revolution. And, there was medical advice at the time saying that if you hugged your children, you were damaging them. Like, literally medical advice. And the biological adaptation that happened in humanity around that season of life. And then you think about intergenerational trauma, where it's now shown, I think it's up to 14 generations. The experiences of our ancestors up to 14 generations ago are still impacting how we perceive threat. And it's essentially like our trauma unless we process it. And so I look at this and go, okay, childhood trauma is part of the story. It is some big stuff, yes, maybe. And it's more so, in my experience, it's more so the time that you had an emotional need and it was not met. It's the time when you were completely dysregulated and overwhelmed. And instead of being met with co-regulation, you were met with stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about, or you're embarrassing me, or go to your room, you're naughty. Like just having a human experience, expressing emotion that we don't have the brain development yet to make sense of. We don't have the past history. We don't have, our hippocampus is not sitting there going, oh, this is just sadness and soon you'll experience happiness. No, it engulfs you and it overwhelms you. And if that is chaotic and if that is not supported and processed in a healthy way, all of that gets encoded in our nervous system. And if it's not safe for us to feel, if we cry and that's, considered naughty or bad or wrong, if our emotions were to send our parents into their own shame spiral or guilt spiral, then we have to become the caretakers of parents' emotional well-being. All of these things is so much more profound in wiring our mind, in wiring our brain and our body. And the conversation that I have with clients all the time is, if you can understand, forget about the stories, forget about the relational aspect of, well, that's my mom and that I don't want to talk about that because I don't want to say they're a bad parent. Forget about all that. Mm-hmm. Just think and imagine that you're just another animal in the animal kingdom with a nervous system. And tell me, in that environment, was your nervous system in a safe or a threatened state? And if they can answer that without the narrative and the complexity of the relational loyalties and all this sort of stuff, 100% of people can see that at an animal level, their nervous system was unsafe. And so then when we look at, okay, well, what are the behaviors that stem from an unsafe nervous system? What are those survival level animal behaviors that we might see? And when they start to understand those behaviors at an animalistic level, then they go, oh my gosh, I wasn't behaving like that because I've got ADHD, or I wasn't behaving like that because I've got an anxiety disorder. I was behaving like that because my environment was, my nervous system was anchored to threat. And the problem with that is that even though we are now adults and we have agency, we have self-responsibility, we can pay our own bills and all that kind of stuff, our nervous system is still anchored and encoded to those early life experiences. And so it's really about, first of all, having compassion and understanding. And a huge part of my own healing journey was recognizing that my dad had major mental health challenges that he didn't even realize. Like, he was in his 60s when he started to understand that the feelings he was feeling was massive anxiety from his own childhood trauma. But his actions and behaviors were my trauma.
Yeah.
Because he didn't know how to cope. He didn't know how to process it or what to do with those big feelings apart from just drink it to numb it out. Now, he wasn't a monster. Did he do some horrific things? Absolutely he did. But he deep down is not a monster. He's a very deeply hurt human. And I am one of very minute minority who has been blessed enough as an adult to go through not only my own healing, but for my dad to lean into his healing too. And we had a
really cool.
It's not lost on me how absolutely unbelievably blessed I am. And we can have these very deep conversations about experiences from my childhood and what that experience was like through the lens of my perception versus what that experience was for him.
Yeah.
And that he was just trying to protect me in the only way he knew how. But that protection to me was, he doesn't love me. I'm not good enough. He doesn't care. And so this mismatch of experience from the one situation or circumstance. And when, a lot of the work we do with clients is about helping them to see truth in a situation where their conclusion led to a lie, but they took that lie with them for the rest of their life. Right. It's absolutely crazy. I think being able to really lean into that stuff without the stories of, no, we're not dishonoring our parents and saying they're bad parents. We're not doing that. We're just trying to understand our own wiring based on the petri dish that our brain grew in our early life.
I love that you brought that up because that's something I used to work through with clients all the time is you can hold your parents responsible to like within your own healing. It's not that you're going to go give them a call and say, you did this and that. I mean, whatever, but it's not about that. I said, you can love them. You can say that they were your parent and that they did the best they could and still acknowledge and hold them responsible for actions that they took, whether it was malicious or not.
That's right.
And I mean, that's a really important thing because a lot of people will deny their own healing because they don't want to say, they think they're saying their parents were bad people. And it's like, it's not, my mom was not a bad person. She was very ill-equipped. And the more healing I do and the more my daughter grows before my eyes and I'm challenged by her early adolescent development, I am understanding how ill-equipped my mother was, how dissociated and she was emotionally unavailable because she was so dissociated and so in survival mode herself.
Exactly.
It doesn't mean that I don't have feelings about the things I experienced, but it allows me a understanding to let myself work through healing even more.
Yeah. And it allows you to open your heart. And I think for me, the feeling and sensation in my heart of literally feeling my chest open and feeling this warmth and compassion and love towards those who have hurt me. Yeah. Not because they woke up that day and went, how can I hurt this kid today? They didn't do that. And also, that was such a necessary step for me to be able to reach a point as a mum to go, my gosh, I didn't even realize the pain and hurt I was causing my kids. Little things like I would dissociate by just zoning out on my phone. I was never present. And I would thought I was a good mum because I did school pickups and drop-offs and I home cooked their meals every night and I did this and I did that. But I was never present. I was always absent. I would go into a fight response, especially over certain things. And my nervous system was literally in this survival state. And the flow-on effect and ripple effect of signaling to my kids' nervous systems that there was threat in the environment that they didn't understand because their brain literally didn't have the parts yet to understand it. But because they're attuned to me for their survival, my constant survival state was putting them in a survival state, and that's where the behaviors stem from. And so being able to, it was like this two-way, this multi-generational healing, because not only for me to heal, did I have to look up my family tree and release people who have done a lot of hardcore wrong for my own healing, but to open that space of forgiveness and compassion and love. But also what was even harder than that was to see where I had hurt and harmed my own children in my own dysfunction that I didn't even know.
Yeah.
And to open my heart with compassion and kindness and forgiveness to myself. And that is a conversation that's not had enough.
It isn't. It isn't had enough. And people feel a lot of shame. And then because they feel shame, they don't even give themselves the opportunity to address things and heal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? That's us right down.
Shame and trauma go hand in hand.
Yeah. And the emotion of shame, I mean, I know we have it for a reason, but trying to move away from that as soon as you can is really important because you can get bogged down in the weight of shame and just not make any kind of
100%. Absolutely.
Yeah. I love this too because I do a lot of educating women specifically, like making family change through the mom is my MO.
Yeah.
And some people feel very attacked by the things that I say, and they're not attacking, they're educating. Like the right person who's ready to take radical responsibility, knowing I was doing the best I can, but even my best, made mistakes, right? I made mistakes and I've done harm. And I'm willing to correct that or repair that or heal and all of that. But other people really have a pretty visceral reaction to the things that I say about how our nervous systems and how our patterns and affect our children and their development and their nervous system and their mental health in the future.
Yeah.
And all of that. And I'm curious how you educate people around this. How do you help them see this without them feeling accused, or like, how do you explain that to people?
Yeah, I think there's a few ways. One is I'll often use myself to model the point. And so when we can intentionally dissociate them from the experience, but I can teach through my lived experience about the reactions that I have had to my children over the years and use those as teaching points, but also being able to say, guys, you've gotten to know me. Am I a monster? Am I a bad person? And they'll go, no, like you are a kind, loving person. I'll go, exactly. And so if I'm a kind, loving person and in my moment of complete dysregulation, out of body survival response, I did that action or I did that behavior, what is the truth there? Is it because I'm a bad person? It's no. And so it's really about helping them to have a frame of reference that this is not about them being bad people. It's about understanding what is driving their behaviors. And I just had this conversation literally just last night with my child, where we are dealing with a family member with major mental illness at the moment. And my child witnessed something that could have potentially been a majorly traumatic experience in his childhood. And we had this conversation just last night. And I said to him, you know, it's really important that you understand that the person that you know and love is real and they're in there. But what you witnessed was not that person. It was their hurt. It was their pain. And so being able to separate our pain from our identity and being able to separate even our actions and behaviors from identity really, really helps, because I can be a good person and say something hurtful. It's not an attack on my identity. And so using myself in examples where people already have a frame of reference of me that I'm a good person and I genuinely care and I love my kids, but even I had made those, you know, I don't want to say mistakes. Even I had behaved in ways in the past that if all they saw was the behavior, it would completely cast judgment or it would change their perspective.
Yeah.
But the second thing is purely in educating that, like I said, taking it back to the animal level and going, we are a flesh meat suit. That's it. Yeah. And so if we're a flesh meat suit and we're obsessed with our survival and this is being perceived as a threat, what are our only options? It's behave like this, or this. All of them are dysfunctional, but they're our survival strategies. And so just like it would be completely irrational for me to say that you're a bad person because you can't not blink.
Right.
Or you're a bad person because I told you to keep your hand in the fire, but you pulled it out. As if it's been a conscious choice for you to blink or to pull your hand out of the fire. That at that level of understanding the nervous system, and I teach into the peripheral nervous system, so the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system, so that people can understand voluntary actions and involuntary actions. You are not a bad person for increasing the heartbeat that you have. You are not a bad person for increasing your temperature or redistributing your blood flow. And yet all of those things happen biologically because you are an animal with a nervous system wired to do some things automatically. And so some of these most dysfunctional, harmful behaviors are not your conscious, logical, rational, voluntary self. They are your animal survival self. And that is not how you have to live. If you can process the threats from the past, if you can process the underlying code that is driving the activation of the survival centers, then you don't have to show up like a wild animal anymore. You can actually embody that sense of safe, compassionate, nurturing, caring self that is the real you. Like that is actually you. You don't need to become anyone or anything else. You need to unbecome who you had to become to survive.
That's how I feel my healing journey has been, is I've pulled back so many layers. I mean, there's still many to go, but I have access to this really tender, precious, feminine, empathetic little girl who got buried really deep in there for a really long time, protected by anger, reactivity, severe anxiety, so hypervigilance. And now I can access that person almost all the time.
Yeah.
And she was always in there. Like she was always in there. And I know that, I can feel that, but I had to peel back the layers and do a lot of rewiring and a lot of neutralizing of things to access her and embody her and live from that.
Yeah, 100%. And it's that little girl within you that is coming up through this reactivity when our little girls, i.e. our daughters, our children in general, not just our daughters, are just being kids. So what I see is the reactivity. It was not safe for me to cry as a kid. And so my nervous system was crying equals danger. And so when my children would cry, all I'm going off is the old playbook that says crying equals danger. What does danger mean? Fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. You pick. So you can either yell at them to stop crying, because that's going to keep that little girl inside me safe. Or I can completely dissociate. I could completely walk away from them and abandon them in their crying, because being present with them crying felt like an existential threat to my safety.
Yeah.
And so again, I'm not a bad mum because I'm triggered by my kids crying, but I don't get to continue the dysfunction. I have to use these things as the diagnostic tool to identify where am I not yet emotionally free.
Yes.
And by, there's things now, like my son is entering high school and we're going through this whole thing. And what I find is that the seasons of parenthood, as my kids have reached certain ages, that has been mirroring to me at that age and forcing me to process some of the traumas that I experienced in my life. And it's the same, if I go to a place where I haven't been since I was a kid, and I can do all this emotional work. I can do all this childhood trauma work for myself and think, oh, great, I'm done. And I'm such a functional human being. And then you go somewhere, right? Like my husband and I went for an interstate trip only a couple of years ago, and I was driving this hire car and I saw a street sign, and I hadn't been there since I was like 9 years old or something. But the last time I was there as a 9-year-old, my dad was extremely stressed and I felt very threatened in the car, because he was very stressed and quite angry and driving erratic. And I felt very threatened in the car. And I saw the street sign and it activated the trauma of me as a 9-year-old in the car feeling scared for my life. And I went into a full-blown trauma response. I was like hyperventilating. I was crying in the street. And my husband's like, what is going on right now? And I'm like, he's so good because he's walked this path with me for years. And I'll say to him, I just need you to hold me. And then he'll wrap me up. And that's the safety. That's the oxytocin. And then when I can process and complete that trauma response and actually get the energy of that old experience out of my body, I can walk past the street sign like it's nothing, like it's just any other street sign. And so it's using these things and these triggers as your gift to know what's still within you that is not processed yet. And that's kind of our philosophy and the approach that we take. Like we've got the courses that help people understand it, but then we've got a membership that is, guys, this isn't just a course that you do. This is a daily life walk. And if you just want to feel a bit less crap, do the course. Awesome. But if you know you're here for evolution, for growth, if you're welcoming triggers into your life, if you're walking into situations and stretching yourself and expanding your comfort zone, and you want us to walk beside you, so that when those triggers come up, we can support you to process it. That's this constant evolution and growth as a human being, so that we're willing to do the work that our kids won't have to.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. So can you, for people listening, maybe they're not a practitioner and they're a parent and they want to take responsibility, they want to do more healing, they don't really always understand how maybe a reaction, or like I used to get really anxious. I don't have that anymore, but I used to get really anxious and my daughter would go into a heightened state. And there would be times when I would my anxiety, I would feel so overwhelmed in a sensory way.
Yep.
That I'd be like, just get away from me, guys. Like get away from me. So of course she felt rejected, right? She had no idea.
sometimes parents don't understand how that can affect their children, right? Yeah. So could you explain that a little bit for people who are listening in?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not the situation that is bad. Like, I can get sensory overload as well. And me having sensory overload, recognizing I have a need and then meeting that need does not make me a bad mum, and it's not traumatic for my kids. But it's how I go about getting that need met. So if I were to not have the self-awareness to recognize this overwhelm coming over me, and then if I wasn't equipped with the language to be able to say to my kids, guys, I'm starting to feel overwhelmed. I need some space. And as soon as I'm feeling better, I can come back and have this conversation, or then we can start snuggles or whatever it might be. And then being able to remove myself from the situation, do the somatic work or do whatever it is that I need to do to actually process the chemicals of stress that it's in my body in that moment, which literally takes 90 seconds. It takes 90 seconds to process the chemicals of an emotion. And then being like, sometimes I might hop in the shower. Sometimes I might get on my bed and scream and punch the pillow. It depends what's coming up for me.
Yeah.
But then being able to come back and revisit that conversation, go, thank you so much. I felt overwhelmed and I needed that space. Thank you so much for giving me that space. Now, what did you need? I'm here. I've got you. Whereas me previously would have not had the awareness that I was even reaching that level of overwhelm.
Yeah.
And what happens, I say to clients all the time, self-awareness is by far the most important thing, because if I can have awareness of what's happening in my body when it's a 4 or 5 out of 10, I still have the front rational part of my brain online to then be able to use the tools that I know I've got. Yeah. Whereas if I don't have that awareness and it is just taking over and taking over and taking over, and it's reaching an 8, a 9, a 10 out of 10, by the time I even have awareness of it, I only have awareness of it when I'm cracking it and I'm pushing my kids away and I'm losing it. Yeah. And so the front part of my brain has all the logical solutions and answers, and everything else is now offline. And all I've got is my survival reactions. My fight, get away from me. My flight, run away. My freeze, just completely numb out. Or fawn, which is where I just self-sacrifice, push through, people please. Yeah. And so in those moments, we've got to be really conscious. A question that I teach clients around this is, if I was my child, would I be feeling really seen, heard, and understood right now? And that's so valuable because it helps me to come up with my own game plan in going, okay, I know that there's certain times of the day where there's so many competing sounds and noises. You've got the range hood on, the dishwasher might be on, there's noise in the background. And I know that those times are more likely to overwhelm me. And so what can I do to be able to support us to continue to have a healthy environment? So there's 2 things, I guess, that it comes down to. One is capacity. So capacity in my nervous system. Have I dealt with the sympathetic nervous system? Have I dealt with the fire? Because I've got fire starters, right, inside my nervous system. That's the sympathetic nervous system, the fight and flight. But also, do I have the tools I need for the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest? Now, I teach my kids this, and I'm like, if it's very good to have breathing techniques and to have all these parasympathetic tools in my toolbox, but that's like my house setting on fire and ringing the fire brigade.
Right.
And I can go, hey, that's great. I've got these tools. My house was set on fire and I used the tools. I used the fire blanket, the extinguisher, I ring the fire brigade, and it's all good. And then the next day, my house is on fire again. And I got to ring the fire brigade. I got to do all the things. So having the tools is great, but we've got to ask the question, why is my house on fire every day?
Yeah.
Right? Because my best case scenario is to do the work so that my sympathetic nervous system is only activating appropriately. Yeah. If there is an actual threat, thank God he created a sympathetic nervous system. Yeah. If there is not a real threat, if my friend didn't respond to my text message, if my child is experiencing a big emotion, if I forgot their lunch, these are not real threats. I'm not going to die. And so when I can actually start seeing truth and responding to real threats as threats, but letting the other things be the safe inconveniences that they are, that's dealing with the fire so that it's like calling the electrician and saying, hey, I think I've got some dodgy wiring because I keep having fires start every day. Can you please fix the wiring?
Yes.
And then we never have to call the fire brigade.
Well, and that's true healing.
Exactly.
That's what people, I think, don't always understand. And I want to talk, as long as you still have time, because I know we're having an amazing conversation right when your time. So you can always stop me at any moment. But I work with a lot of women who are over functioning.
Yeah.
And who it's like, well, I have my shit together, so I'm probably doing okay, even though there's so much silent suffering.
Yeah.
They have high functioning anxiety. They're very dysregulated. And just because you can white knuckle it through doesn't mean that you're okay. And they end up having all these health issues down the road, especially when hormones start to shift, around age 35. And I'm wondering if you can just give a little insight to that, because I think this is a huge epidemic in our world with women specifically, moms and high performance women.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
100%. And to me, this comes down to identity. So good girl programming, like what did you need to be? What did you need to not be in order to feel good as a kid? So for me, because you just described me to a T, for me, it was I had to be quiet. I had to not have emotions. I had to perform. I had to do well at school. I had to, insert all these criteria here as a kid. And I learned at a very young age that if I got good grades, then my dad was happy. And if my dad was happy, I was safe. I learned at a very young age that if I pushed through, then my dad was happy and I was very safe. And so the other thing is society in general praises override, nervous system override. And so recognizing in our nervous system that we might be starting to get a little bit run down, that we might have some signs that our nervous system is, I use the analogy of like a car going around a racetrack. If we go, oh my gosh, we're performing so well, I'm winning, I don't want to go into the pits for my, compulsory pit stop. I'm just going to keep going because I don't want to lose the race.
Yeah.
But then if we don't go into the pits and proactively change our tires, put fuel in the car, fix any issues that are coming up, and we do keep going, what happens? It's inevitable. There is no other way for the car to not break down. It has to break down. And so when I work with clients and I talk about treating our body like a race car, I like to go fast. I have a lot on my plate all the time. I'm a high-performing, high-functioning human being, multi-passionate. But even if I am the fastest, best, most highly tuned race car on the planet, if I don't go into the pits, I'm going to break down.
Yeah.
And so that analogy really just helped me to go, I need to schedule my pit stops proactively. How long is my fuel tank range? Okay, cool. That means I have to have a pit stop there. And if I don't, this is what's going to happen. And that really, really helped me. But secondly, also is, like I said, I mentioned before, unbecoming the person you had to become to survive. And for me, the person I had to be to survive was that good girl, the people pleaser, the one who was always above and beyond, the one who never let anyone down. She didn't make mistakes. She used control to be safe. She was a perfectionist because if she could be perfect, she was worthy of love. And all of those things were such dysfunctional prison cells. Yeah. Like I was literally a prisoner because it meant that if I made a mistake, the self-loathing, the suffocating feeling in my body like the whole world was going to end because I forgot this one thing. I would be so critical and so harsh towards myself. And so what happens is all of our systems in our body are connected. So what happens when we get really stressed? Well, we get sick because guess what? Nervous system and immune system talk to each other. What's another symptom? I'm going to get digestive issues or I'm going to develop allergies or food intolerances. Why? Because stress impacts the gut, the digestive system. We literally have a whole nervous system called the enteric nervous system, which is in our gut. The endocrine system. Our stress hormones are a hormone and they're going to cause other hormones to upregulate or downregulate. And so our endocrine system is now impacted. There's no system in the human body that's not impacted by our nervous system. And so like I said before, there's so much pop culture now about regulating the nervous system. You go on TikTok and type regulating your nervous system and everyone's doing these vagal exercises and breathing techniques and cold water immersion and all this stuff. And I'm not saying that that's not important. It is important, but we don't get to do that in the absence of dealing with why our nervous system is on fire in the first place. And we don't get to do that without behavior change. Behavior change looks like saying no to things that we previously would have said yes to. It looks like tuning into our body and prioritizing, actually connecting to this vessel that carries us through every day with some loving kindness and care.
Yeah.
They're the kinds of things that, unless we're willing to do that, we're screwed, honestly. And it is very sad when people come to me at this point of complete burnout and complete capitulation, when it's like they waited all that time to even have permission to exist, to have a need, to meet that need.
Why? So I have my own theories about why I think that is, but I'm curious why you think that is, because a lot of people, how I describe, specifically these women, right? They do wait until it's pretty horrific. And I'm just curious what your theory around that is.
I don't think it's just women. I think it's everyone.
Really? Well, I don't work with a lot of men, so I don't have a
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I actually work with a lot of men, and this has always been curious for me because I grew up with only brothers. I grew up racing BMX, so I was a massive tomboy, and I've always more naturally felt connected to men.
Okay.
And so I have a lot of male clients, and interestingly, they are more likely to present with things like addiction. Or they'll say anger issues. And I think because our work is not talk-based therapy, that's why men are drawn to it, because they're like, I can see it's ruining my life. My wife wants to leave me. My kids hate me and want nothing to do with me. I'm struggling at work, but I don't want to sit here and relentlessly talk about my issues. And so when I can help them to understand their addiction is not the problem. Like, I started with a new client with addiction yesterday, and I said to them, your addiction is not the problem. I'm not going to sit here and even mention your addiction once, because all that is doing, you are so smart and so intuitive and so aware that you tried something that made you experience less pain. And remember, that's your solution, because you are a freaking genius. It's not your problem. So let's understand, what is that addictive substance getting you away from? And in this particular person's case, it was things like absolutely ruminating thoughts, self-hatred, self-loathing, like all of these really dark thoughts and feelings in their body that they didn't know what to do with. And so that substance moved them away from that threat. But it also moved them towards, I said, what does it move you towards? And they said, peace, freedom, like mental clarity. And it's like, okay, so that's the thing that you want to feel. And that's the purpose that thing is serving. But the bigger threat to you is the thing you don't want to feel, which is all those negative feelings. But all that is just unprocessed emotion and trauma from the past. And so in my experience, I use a dentist analogy for this. Like if I had a tooth pain, and it hurt when I ate ice cream. And when I ate ice cream, it was like 8 out of 10, but the rest of the time, it's like a 2 out of 10. I know it's there and I should probably call the dentist, but like, I'm busy. I got work. Dentist is expensive. There's other things I want to spend my money on. Future me. I'll deal with that later. Now, imagine that is not just when I eat ice cream.
Yeah.
That's a 9 out of 10 pain, and I can't sleep. I can't function. It's invading my daily life, my daily mind. It's painful when I work. It's painful when I shower. It's painful when I'm in bed. Now it's so intrusive that not fixing the pain is worse than the discomfort it's going to take to deal with it. And so it really is this tipping point. I call it the I can't do this anymore scale. This is going to sound so silly, but it's literally in my client intake. If I'm working with people one-on-one, I don't do a lot of one-on-one work anymore. I do like high level entrepreneurship, mentorship and stuff, but when it comes to the very generic, general human experience stuff, that's all in our courses. So, but in my intake, I used to have this scale, and it was 1 to 10 on the I can't do this anymore scale. Where are you? And if someone was anywhere less than an 8, I would give them some podcast episodes to listen to. I would give them some work to do. And the podcast episodes I would get them to listen to would be things that would amplify their pain. Why? Because if I worked with them when they were anywhere less than an 8, they wouldn't show up. they'd be too busy. They wouldn't want to spend the money on it. They wouldn't want to do anything because the pain of their problem is not big enough yet for them to be motivated to change. And so having some resources that actually get them to self-reflect and go, if nothing changes right now, how's your relationship with your kids in 10 years? What does that look like? If nothing changes right now, how much longer do you think your marriage actually has left? And how much does divorce cost? And that's in a manipulative way. It's purely just in helping people to see the truth of their current circumstance, because if people really saw it, they'd be willing to change it.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of us walk around semi-dissociated from our problems or fully dissociated, right? And so, I mean, I think that you doing that is brilliant and very serving of people. It just is helping. It's helping the person actually process what they really want. Because most people don't know how to do that.
No. And I find it's quite dysfunctional the other way. I'm surrounded by many, many, many counselors and therapists of different kinds. And I find that the people who want to go into that industry want to go into the industry because they care and they want to help people.
Yeah.
But they go in with this dysfunctional helper, rescuer mindset where their worth is determined by whether or not they could rescue someone.
That's interesting.
It's very interesting and it's very dysfunctional. And so when we start to bring our own lack of awareness and dysfunction into our professional work, where someone else, whether or not someone else improves their life or sees clinical outcomes, is impacting whether or not I go into a shame response and go, I'm not a good enough practitioner and, well, I mustn't have done enough or I wasn't, whatever that might be. Yeah. That's our dysfunction. And we are now no longer putting our client first. It becomes about us. And so I find this real toxic, dysfunctional state can come up for people when they need to rescue, because what they'll do is that. So you got this dynamic where you've got a victim and you've got a rescuer.
Yeah.
The victim can only experience themselves as a victim if there's someone rescuing them. Mm-hmm. And so if I had a consultation with someone and they said, oh, I'm about a 6 out of 10. Well, if I wanted to, or it doesn't really matter whether they're a 6 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10 or whatever. If my dysfunction was still at play, I would want to help them and encourage them and love them and calm them down and help them to feel better. But if I help them to feel better, I'm stealing the very leverage they have to change.
Yeah.
Because I'm uncomfortable with them not feeling great. So my need for people around me to feel better is actually stealing their opportunity for healing. Whereas if I can be so deeply grounded and hold space and hold love and safety to invite them to walk through the door of healing that requires that 8, 9, and 10 level of commitment and willingness to see the truth in their circumstance and themselves and their situation, I cannot numb them out first. I cannot lower their discomfort, because then they never have an incentive to walk through the door. I have just played the rescuer in that moment and said, oh, you poor thing. Oh, darling, it's okay. Well, it's actually not okay. And I say this to people all the time. You're not paying me for you to like me. I'm okay if you don't like me sometimes, because I love you enough for you to not like me so you can heal. And it took me a long time to reach that point where I had overcome my own need to be liked and fear of rejection enough to be able to hold that deeply vulnerable, scary level of space for someone.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah.
It sounds like the work you're doing is insanely valuable. Do you see people only in person?
No, we are global. So even if I was working with my next door neighbor, I wouldn't work with them in person. And the reason for that is very interesting. It's neurological. Because of anchors, we can have, if I said to you, go and find somewhere comfy for us to have this chat. Most people will sit on their favorite couch, in their bed, or somewhere where they're anchored to safety.
Yeah, I just thought of my bed. I'm like, I'm going to go.
Exactly. Right? Exactly. And so just to my right, just over here, I have what I call my ponder chairs, and they are sitting overlooking that. We've got these almost floor to ceiling windows that overlooks a beautiful view. And if I was going to be having a conversation, where I was going to be anchored to safety and comfort and calm, that's where I would sit. And so this really amazing thing happens in our nervous system where when we are anchored to safety, remember what I said ages ago, that safety is an absolute priority when it comes to processing trauma and healing. And so in my experience, I used to see people face to face, but in my experience, so many people have so many interesting anchors. It could be things like, I don't know what to wear. I don't know what time I have to leave. I have to deal with traffic. I've got to find a car park. I'm going to sit in a weird waiting room in an unfamiliar environment. All of those things create unsafety in the nervous system and uncertainty. And if I have someone sitting in front of me where their nervous system is already in a threatened state, a heightened activated state, the work I want to do with them cannot be as effective as if their nervous system is primed, anchored to safety, and ready for transformation. And so even just at that nervous system level, the decision that we made to exclusively work online allows for that transformation to happen in a much, much faster way. I can't replicate the results that we get online, working with people face to face. It's very interesting.
That is very interesting. That's awesome. And that leads me to wondering about people going into the therapy office and sitting on a couch and all of these things, right?
Yeah. And the anchors that brings. Like if you have an anchor that this is the place I go because I'm broken, is there actually potential for healing when your mind and your body are anchored to this is where I am because I'm broken? Well, if you heal, you can't be in that place, right? It's so fascinating. Like there's so much to understand in how we assign meaning to things and how that all gets encoded and the biological and physiological effects of that. It's fascinating.
It is fascinating. So I know you have some courses that you're launching. I would love for you to share that because that's going to be the link to that's going to be available.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about these courses you're launching.
So Remind Institute has core pillars. So we separate it into personal development, which is parenting, relationships, and mental health. And then we have professional development, which is creating emotionally and psychologically safe workplaces. So leadership, entrepreneurship, all that sort of stuff. And so we do a lot of work in the parenting space, but our mental health courses are super close to being launched, and they probably will already be launched by the time this goes live. And there's a foundations course where I use the word flavor. So whatever flavor of mental health challenge we might face, there are some fundamental truths of us as animals that everyone needs to understand. And so I've got the foundations course, and then there's the specializations. So there's one specifically for anxiety, for depression, for addiction, for complex PTSD, for, emotional dysregulation, for burnout, for perfectionism and control. So it's like this whole entire suite of just about everything that I could think of, that my hope is that as people start to understand the intricacies and the application, it's really the application of the nervous system and the mind-body stuff relevant to that specific presentation, then it also includes all the therapeutic processing and all that sort of stuff within each of those specialization courses. So
that's incredible. So people will be able to do healing work, learn the healing modalities that they can use on themselves, essentially.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. 100%. And we have communities. Our online community is split into personal and professional development. There is an option. So that's all like a self-led journey, but we do co-working time. So it's scheduled Zoom sessions where you can kind of create your own schedule around when you want to work on the courses. And that gives people accountability because so many businesses will just sell courses. But do you know the completion rate is like 2%?
Yeah, it's really low.
And so I'm like, I didn't create these courses to earn money. I created the courses to help people change their life. If only 2% of the people who buy this actually change their life, it has completely invalidated the whole reason I've done it in the first place.
Yeah.
So creating these co-working spaces gives people the opportunity to have some accountability. They've got to find the time in their week to show up and do their coursework. There's so much scaffolding. I was a lecturer for 12 years, so pedagogy and learning design was a really big part of my expertise. So we have really tried to make it a transformation. I say it's revelation for transformation, not information for education.
That's so good. I love it. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so it's Remind Institute. If you're on Instagram or Facebook or literally any platform, just search for Remind Institute. The picture is a brain. This is really cool. I love our logo because it's a brain to represent the neuroscience. And then it's actually got like, on a TV remote, the rewind symbol. Well, the rewind symbol is in the center of the brain, and that represents looking back at the past to actually process all that unresolved stuff and rewire the brain. So Remind Institute, you'll know it when you see it.
And all of it will be linked in the show notes as well so that people can go and find you. I could talk to you for hours.
Well, we've had a good crack.
We have, and I'm so grateful that you said yes to this and that we got paired up to do this. And I am really excited for people to hear this episode.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I love this, and I feel that this is the stuff that if humanity really understood, it would cause the absolute crashing of an entire system that I honestly think is like the Titanic and needs to crash. So if this is the iceberg that hits that and sinks it, I am down for that.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, that's really what we're trying to do, right? Just educate, empower, bring awareness so people can start to make truly intuitive decisions and grounded decisions and know where to find other resources to educate themselves further, to ask more questions. And this episode has been profound. I cannot wait for people to hear this.
Thank you.
It's going to be a huge revelation for a lot of people. I'm really excited.
Yeah, I'm really grateful to share this time together and just to serve your community. It's been awesome.
Yes. Thank you so much. Okay, you guys, go find the Remind Institute. Go dive into all of the resources and consider working with the Remind Institute on a deeper level than just the resources that they provide that are free. I'm really excited for people to get a hold of working with you.
Thank you.
I am eternally grateful you tuned into The Truth About Mental Health. If this message matters to you, please spread the word by subscribing, leaving a 5-star review, and sharing with someone who needs this knowledge. Let's keep reclaiming our mental health together.